Well, I want to talk about how you can develop layered bedding on your property for bucks and does. This is a natural occurrence out in the woods, and you know, as someone who scouts or has been on over 1,500 deer parcels around the country scouting for clients and looking where deer bed and getting feedback from the clients, it's pretty cool because we get to scout deer and deer bedding for a living. What we constantly see is that layering effect where you have does and fawns closer to food and then bucks behind them. Bucks are never between, unless it's during the rut and they're with a doe, they're never between the doe family group area and the food source. So let me talk about this area in particular. We have 7 beds that I see just from standing in one spot, and I think if we go down here we're going to see some more, but we have beds behind Dylan right up into here, and then we have bed right there, bed right here. And how do you know it's a doe bedding area? You know, you talk about why is it doe bedding? Well, if you start looking at all the pellets around here, you start seeing small pellets and big pellets combined. Those small pellets are from fawns, young does and fawns, and then the larger pellets for older does. And so when you see clusters of lots of beds like this, definitely a doe bedding area. And why did the does bed here? You need to understand that. You can't just say, well, this is a doe bedding area. I think I've even seen online out there where people have talked about, well, if you create a bedding area this way, you'll attract does. There's so much more that it takes to get does to bed into an area than just saying, well, there's room for 5 or 6 or room for 7. That's kind of silly, actually. Instead, the bedding here in this location starts from the food source right up there. Now that food source from here is about 100 yards. And we have screening around that food source and switchgrass that's coming in. We also have a lot of gray dogwood and brush around there. So you have that first layer of protection, meaning that a deer doesn't have to go that far back and they can't look out into that open field. They don't like bedding and looking through open hardwoods 100 yards away right out into an open field or an open food plot. They're not going to bed there. They want to go back to where they feel safe and secure. And so if you lack that first layer of screening, then you're going to push those does further and further back. What does that do? It pushes bucks further and further back, because if the does don't want to bed close to the field edge, those bucks certainly aren't. And in fact, they bed on the other side of those does and fawns. And then you don't have room for bucks. And a lot of times, you know, those bucks want to bed within 200 to 300 yards, 400 yards at most in the average wood lot from their main food source. So think about a 40-acre parcel. It's only a quarter-mile wide. You have a big food source on one side and it's 100 yards in. You're left with 340 yards. Start to do the math. If those does and fawns are not bedding for 100 yards from that food source or 150 yards from that food source, if bucks were going to bed, they're going to bed on your border or on your neighbor's land. They're going to be behind those does and fawns. Now you're putting them at your access route. So the key is have that great screening up along the food source. And then we get back here, we have pretty good stem acre, and we have a mix of conifer in here. There's various forms of browse. We have shrubs around here too. So they can actually have browse in this location. I look at it like we have more pressing areas on the property to create deer bedding. So I'll look at this and I'll say, you know what? Deer can bed here. The sign tells us they are already. So we're stepped back into this doe fawn area. We can verify that by pellet size and the number of beds. And then we go back there 100 yards, 150 yards. We have that buck bedding opportunity location. It all starts up there. You have to have that screening around the main food. That defines where does bed. It's a little secret. When we go to properties and we look at properties, that's how we can look at it and say, you know what, this is going to be good doe bedding right here because it's next to food. That creates an opening for bucks over here. In almost all properties you go to, there's some major holes. So we look at a property and say, well, there's just no room left for mature bucks. And imagine if we had food over there, and then we have food over there 50 yards, and then the border's 150 yards past that. Because of the food location and where it dictates at doe's bed, now there's no room left over for bucks on the entire property. You just run out because you have too much food located too centrally on your property in core areas, and that pushes buck bedding off. Instead, this location, we have the food, the screening, we have bedding opportunity. This is not a high priority area. We could improve the bedding a little bit, but we don't need to. We have other pressing areas on the property to improve bedding, to fill in those holes. Then we have buck bedding over there. What's that all setting up? It sets up a stand assemblage to allow us to hunt. What that means is we can come off over to the side over here in a location where we don't expect deer bedding. We can hunt there, allowing deer to come past us and out of this bedding area without spooking the bedding area to get to that food source. Maybe in a location's dry, we add a water hole over there. Mock scrape certainly at every stand location. Now we have an afternoon stand location that deals with this. Maybe we can have another one on this side for a different wind, depending on where you're at and how wide that movement is. You just go right up to that edge where there's thick cover and where there's potential movement where deer feel safe. If we have an open wood lot over there, it's big open hardwoods, we're not going to put a stand on the other side of it because those deer have to cross through that. Oh, they're leaving their bedding areas to go feed in a food source in the afternoon. They have secure cover here. They're not going to want to go 100 yards through open hardwoods to get to your stand location over there. So it's got to be on the edge of this cover. That creates afternoon, evening stands that relate to food. Back here, that sets up buck bedding. What does that equal? Morning, backside of movement. When you hear me say backside of movement, it's because we have food, screening, does, buck opportunity, and then that's that movement every day, that 200 to 400 yards where they'll move within that range every day to their afternoon food source. You get on the back side of that bedding where we have a stand location back here potentially. You've already added a mock scrape, had great footage. Now we're at that back side where we can come in the morning, wait for those bucks to come back to us. In this case, we're gonna add a water hole right back there. Perfect cruising area, maybe even an early season hot spot where if we have clover out here, some bucks are hitting that. They're coming back here and bedding in the morning. We wait for a cool morning when they're getting to their beds a little bit later. And then we can slip in the side on another road over here, go right up to that stand. Now we have morning stands. We have morning stands for various winds because it's off this point here. Maybe you have a funnel through a swamp. You're hunting in a morning stand. You can blow your scent on one side or the other for two different stands. But now we have that entire stand assemblage when we have this layering. It's very critical for your property and to understand it. Once you have the food, the screening, the does, and the bucks, it gives you morning stand opportunities for the rut, opening day gun season, maybe opening day in the early season if they're coming back to that area, and then afternoon stands out here. So it gives you that entire stand assemblage that you need for a successful hunt. You know what's interesting is if it's a really tight, small property, we'd condense this a little bit more. We'd have to work on this cover around here. We have a little bit more space to work with on this property. But if we're looking at 30 acres, 20 acres, you'd want to compact that a lot more, and all those layers of habitat will allow deer to bed closer to each other in proximity. But when we're hunting out on public land, what we're looking for is the same effect. You have a good food source over here. You know, when you look at the habitat, sometimes aerial photos or lay of the land, benches on the side, a saddle nearby, maybe the edge of a swamp, and it's close to that food source, and you know those does and fawns are going to bed in that habitat diversity, which you can see from above, and that means those bucks are out in the islands on that swamp. Hope that makes sense. Or if they're in big open hardwoods, the does might be up on those flats or close to the flats, and bucks will be just off to the side behind those does and fawns. That entire movement on public land might be a half mile. Instead of 200 to 400 yards, it might be 800 yards, 900 yards, might be 3/4 of a mile, but it's the same exact thing. There's bucks and does, they layer the same way. Doesn't matter if it's public land or private land. And there's always the exception to all of these rules, but it's a 90% rule. So if you hunt like that, you plan like that, you plan your stands accordingly, it doesn't matter if it's on public or private land, then you're gonna find success while you're whitetail hunting. Doesn't matter if it's on a tiny, small, private parcel, if you understand this layering feature, or a giant expanse of public land, you can always find success if you understand these key features of how bucks and does choose to bed during the daylight. Now, I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, or WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.